All right, Rick. Well, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate having you on, and we're going to jump right into it. But so glad that over this holiday season, before we even hit into January, and I know today you got a Discovery Day happening, so you're super busy. But again, thanks for joining.
Yeah, my pleasure, Michael. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
So jumping right in here, there's some people that we have crossed paths with. We ourselves have not actually had an opportunity to meet except for today. And there are a lot of people, it's kind of like any industry. When you're in the industry long enough, a lot of people know of others that are in the industry. And one of the common people that we know of is Andy Gunlock. He's got some Anytime locations up in Wisconsin. And I had run personal training. I had installed my personal training program in his clubs for several years. And then after I exited, I think you came in. So we had this kind of like crossing of paths. But one of the things that I always focused on was what I call as my MPR metric. And it's the member to personal training revenue ratio. So what I knew was that for every roughly 10 members, we were going to generate about $6,000 in revenue. So we knew 25% of all members, they were going to get personal training at some point in time that they were in that window. It was 85% booked an appointment, 65% showed, 45% closed. And we knew we were generating around $400 per person. But then we always had this like big disparity, right? So we knew 45% were coming in and they were buying personal training. We were going to help them change their lives a little bit and they were going to see some progress. But then there was that 60%, right? So or 55 to 60% that just didn't buy anything. And the reality is, and we're rolling up on January, everybody has this idea that they're going to have a New Year's resolution. And in the gyms, a lot of people are in this idea of purchasing a membership. It's a feel good for them, but they actually don't do anything with it. So, that was always a challenge and struggle for me. And I know you went from licensing to franchising. So, really when you're shifting to this brick and mortar model, you leave behind this gym member base. So what strategies did you employ to attract dedicated clientele to the standalone locations? Because I think that's a big question, right? From going to this gym member model where you have a pool of people to work with and you can help change their lives, to having a standalone model where you're just kind of relying on people to show up, or you've got to make sure you've got some good advertising and marketing campaigns going. How did you, what strategies did you employ and how are you doing that?
Yeah, I think it's the same strategies that any brick and mortar would use, right? It's a multi-channeled approach, if you will, right, to marketing. So to your point, when we were licensing, we had a captive audience of memberships inside of a large health club. And we could then market to those people. We had some great success doing that. But when you are brick and mortar, then you're just trying to get people to walk through your doors, right? And there's different KPIs you mentioned, like book, show, close rate early, very similar in the studio model. The metrics are a bit different, but it's the normal channels. Honestly, Michael, there's digital, and that's everything from the Meta to Google Suite, which is obviously YouTube as well. There's tons of grassroots marketing, which is just community-based guerrilla marketing, whatever you want to call that. In addition to that, there's referral programs. It's basically any and all things. So it's all hands on deck. And it's a good mix of digital, which is direct response, and community-based marketing, which really works well for a personal training brand because it's all based on relationships anyway, right? So community-based marketing is a great way to do it. And then one thing we do well is a really healthy pre-sale. So once you have a cohort of customers in your gym, you can start to service them really well. And then if you have referral programs and tripwires and things put in place, it makes it really easy to attract like people, right? Like these are clients that are, clients of our gym. Our studio, they're typically going to stay 3 years, right? They're going to pay a premium to be there. So where are other people like that? It's like, well, they're probably friends of the people that are in your gym. And so it makes it really easy to run a referral program. So it's kind of any and all things. I mean, nothing earth-shatteringly different. Everyone wants to have the magic bullet, right? Or the silver bullet. There's really not one, as you know. It's just blocking and tackling. And the difference is doing it or doing it well. That's really the difference. So great thing about franchise is we have all these playbooks built out. We've got digital campaign that we just turn on, leads start coming in. There's no, there's no ramp time or split testing ads and all the stuff that takes a lot of time when you're an independent owner. All that stuff is gone, which is, again, the advantage of buying a business in a box, right?
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I recommend to a lot of people. Like if they're in this, and you've probably seen this yourself, there are a lot of PT studio owners. There are a lot of gym owners out there, and they struggle. They probably make less money than they would if they just went and got a job somewhere and worked for a corporation. And they're doing it because they're passionate about it. But then they struggle. They're working not 40 hours a week. They're working 80 hours a week because it's a business that owns them. And they struggle with, what do I do next? How do I move the ball forward? How do I move the needle and make some money and live a more full and richer life? And I hear it a lot because there's a lot of groups that I work with our software company, BizOps, that are using our software to help run their studios. And they're asking questions like, how do I do marketing? How do I do all of these other things? And when I hear that, a lot of times I'm like, have you ever thought about franchising? Because you have a space that you can go to where they've already tested things, right? That A/B test that you're talking about, they've tested it time and time again. And you guys already know what's going to work or what's going to be more likely to work. So, I always do recommend for that, for those individuals who maybe they don't have the breadth of knowledge, or they just haven't gotten there yet. They haven't developed those skills. So, circling back to this on one-on-one training, because if I remember correctly, the way that your model is designed is more kind of like team-based, group-based. You also do some one-on-ones, but explain to me the model specifically. How do you guys how do you tackle this thing and make it work?
Yeah, it's actually surprisingly neither one of those things. So, you're probably thinking of it through the lens of what we did for Anytime Fitness, which, remember, at that time when we were licensing, it was also a lot of consulting on the front end. So when we approach a brand like Anytime, it's like, these are our goals. We would look at what their footprint looked like space-wise, what their strengths are, who's their customer avatar. Traditionally, they had done a lot of legwork on that already, obviously, as a big brand. And so then we would build something specific to them. So whatever we built for them is not at all what we do. So we've been in business since 1992.
Yeah.
To your point, the first 10 years we did one-on-one training, but we noticed over time, these sort of organic happenings. Like, Michael, you're training with us in 1999, which sounds crazy, and then you're like, hey, can I bring a friend? And we're like, sure. So you bring a friend, you guys are now having more fun. You're paying a little bit less. We're making more money. And then you guys say, oh, there's a guy that we golf with on the weekends. Can we bring him? It's like, sure. Now there's 3 people. Once again, you're paying a little less. It's a more valuable hour for the business. It's more fun. There's better professional boundaries for the coaches. I mean, everything, all the metrics were better. There's more accountability for you, right? Because now you have a friend group instead of just a coach, you have both. So all these cool things were happening organically. And in the early 2000s, we just ripped the Band-Aid off and said, look, we're going to pivot from one-on-one training. At the time, we were doing 3,000 one-on-one sessions a month. I mean, a massive business, right? Let's pivot from that to what, personal training people in a small group. Now, it's not a class at all. It's still personal training. We just can scale it up to 6 people with one coach. Of course, everyone asks, why 6 people? I'm like, well, because we tried 8 and it felt like a class. And to us, that's like a C word. It's a dirty word. You don't say the C word, right? No, we literally have shirts that have the word class with a slash through it. It is not a class. Classing has price anchors and, service anchors that go with it. Like I can take a free class at the rec center, right? It's like, it's not that. It's still personal training. We've just figured out over the last 32 years how to service personal training in a group of up to 6, which brings in a social component that you don't get with one-on-one. It also brings good value proposition because, we're typically going to be 50 to 60% per session of what the market rate is in that particular market. So it's a really good value to the right customer avatar. And it's a lot more fun. It's more accountability. It's just a win-win-win all the way across the board. So we service 1 coach to 6 customers at any given time, maximum of 6. It's usually an average of 4 to 6. A good goal for a an efficiency rate for us would be around 80%, a little bit more, which is like 5 out of 6 people booked every single hour. That's an ideal efficiency rate. And that's how we basically reverse engineered capacity for one of our studios.
So do you do more than one group or one small group per hour?
Just one at a time. Yeah. And there's so many cool things about that. Like the footprint of the floor needs to be a specific size to drive intimacy, right? And we need to be able to almost reach out and touch anyone at any given time. I mean, it is personal training. So if it's too big, it feels too, it's too large. It feels the energy gets a little low. If it's too small, you're climbing all over each other. I mean, there's a science to it that takes a minute to figure out. Because when you hear it, you're like, oh, that's easy. You're just training 6 people at a time. It's like, it is easy. It's like fat loss. It's simple, but not easy, right? But it's nuanced. It really is. And so we spent a gazillion years figuring out how to run this thing efficiently, create a great customer experience so we can keep the brand promise, personal training, but keep the cost reasonable for the right consumer.
So what's the footprint size? Because I see training studios, they range anywhere from 1,500 square feet to 6,500 square. I've seen training studios at 12,000 square feet, and they incorporate membership.
We're 1,500 to 2,000, so minimally 1,500. Okay. We could go over 2,000. It just depends on the rent factor. We're not going to let people break their business model by going too big. And then if we do that, we also have to strategically keep the exercise floor the same size, right? So we might do things like an extra storage room or something to keep that exercise floor the same size for the intimacy that we talked about, right? And we've got the core tenets on creating a customer experience around the workout. I'm air quoting workout. And those things have a lot to do. Like, as an example, everyone's greeted within 10 seconds of entering the front door by name, right? Well, you can't do that if you're standing in the back and you can't even see the front, right? So it's this feel of like this small destination place where you pull up, you step in. It's like, if you remember the old show Cheers about the bar where like everybody knew your name, that's what it is. Yeah. And I'm sure you're familiar with that. Anybody that's listening to this in the fitness business understands what that means, but that's really what makes it special. So we put a lot into what comes out as a really seemingly simple solution, but a lot of research and time went into making it such.
So what would you, it's in your FDD, I would imagine, because you have to, but what's the average revenue of a alloy? Can I ask that question? Is that okay?
I don't think that's in the FDD, but we talk about the average stay of a customer is around 36 months. The average spend is around $300 a month. I think we'll see that nudge up a bit as our next FDD comes out, because take into account that number's also taking into account all clubs that are in maybe a pre-sale. If we're running maybe a bit of a price incentive as a pre-sale hook, whatever those things are, all that's factored in. So, imagine north 350, sometimes up to 400, and again, depends on the market, right? Because we've got different pricing tiers for different markets. But yeah, it's, folks are going to stay a while and they're going to stay longer, pay more is really the formula. And I mean, you can back your way into what that would look like as a business model. I will tell you 130 members is a really healthy model. 150 is somewhat max for us. It's funny, before we jumped on the podcast, I jumped onto your YouTube page and clicked on a short, and the guy's talking about Dunbar's number. It's like, oh man, we've been preaching that for 20 years, right? It's like Robin Dunbar, British scientist, basically says you can't maintain a cognitive relationship other than really close friends and family with more than about 150 people. So like, if you want to drive, like sometimes it's that simple, right? Like what makes your retention rate, what it is, because it's really high and our attrition is really low. Why? Well, because we know everyone's name. We know their kids' names. They know us. They know our kids' names. I mean, it is a true family feel. And though we're growing really quickly as a brand, each location just feels like your local neighborhood, personal training gym, which is what it should feel like.
So what is that cost per square foot typically that these guys are getting into?
Well, we like to keep our rent factor around 15%, ideally, give or take. So it really depends on the market, right? If you're going into Bethesda, Maryland, or Orange County, California, it's going to be expensive, but it's typically mitigated by the price threshold that you can charge. So normally that formula works out pretty well. We've had a couple of challenging markets like post-pandemic, like Austin and Nashville, where people are just flocking there. So real estate's a bit more expensive compared to what you can charge. I mean, you're in Nashville, so you can't charge New York rates, right, per se, but yet sometimes real estate can get there. So we've been able to navigate that pretty well thus far, but basically that's the formula. We try to keep it around 15% rent factor.
And then do you guys have a I mean, you sat on the board with Anytime Fitness as an advisor, and I'm sure you heard a lot and probably gained some insights on things on franchising before you got into it. But do you guys do anything with members or clients being able to use other locations, or is that not part of the model?
It's not part of the model now, and it's no fault of ours. It's simply a software issue. That's it. I mean, right now we use MindBody. They have which is shocking because that's who a lot of other big studio models use. They have no solution for, this person receives the revenue and this person incurs the cost of revenue. How would you do that if they wanted to work out at another location? Because there is a direct cost, essentially, right? They're taking up a space, if you will, as opposed to like, say in Anytime where you're just scanning in and you can go wherever you want. And even they have mechanisms where if you move and you start frequently using a different location, they're incurring the cost, hard or not, of somebody visiting their gym frequently. They have mechanisms to then transfer the revenue to that particular location, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas with us, it would be more like we're typically in someone's backyard. Like it has to be convenient, right? So we're 2 miles from their house. Think of like densely populated, wealthy suburbs is where we go. So it would be more of a, hey, I'm on vacation, or maybe I'll work across town. I want to pop into an Alloy. We have zero solutions for that right now, which I know sounds crazy. And I think it's nuts as well, but it's really just a software challenge. None of the big software companies that we work with can figure out how to deduct a session from location A, and credit it to location B. They can't, they don't have it yet. I mean, we're pushing for it, but not yet.
Well, it's funny you say that, and this was not intentional to bring this up. But the reality is that was the problem I was having with our locations, because we had locations across 5 different states for PT. And so we had clients that would take a vacation and they wanted to go to another gym and then use their training sessions. And so we had to build for it. So that was the start of our software company. That's how we designed it. It was really more adaptable for personal training. So we have a solution for that, just FYI.
Good job, Michael. Way to slide that in there. That was perfectly teed up. I feel like you're playing 4D chess and I'm over here playing checkers. You're like, answer me this. It's funny you say that, Rick. Yeah. We just so happen to have a solution. Yeah. I'm just teasing you, but that is awesome, dude. I mean, it's a common challenge for all boutique, fitness businesses.
Yeah, we experienced it too. So, I mean, it was a problem. But needless to say, I wanted to talk also about, the difference between capturing gym members, because for me, when we were running in all these locations, we're feeding off of the gym members that are walking into the club. So that, we're riding the coattails of the business. And that was our prospecting list. I mean, it was real simple. And gyms that are running today, the big box stores, they have their own PT program. A lot of them have their own PT programs operating in them. Lifetime Fitness. Then you look at like Crunch Fitness. These guys have a specific program they run at Gold's Gym. A lot of them are like this, and they don't have to do any extra marketing really for personal training. You have a gym member come in and you hit that NPR number that I was talking about before. You're going to hit those numbers on the monetary side, and you also know that you're going to keep more people because of it. So how do you I see that as a challenge, because me coming into this is one of the reasons why I didn't open a PT studio, although I probably should have. I opened gyms, and the challenge that I always saw was the downside monetarily, right? I could go into any gym as long as they were willing to have me, and I could operate PT and I could drive revenue, and I knew what my numbers were after I had a chance to review their member metrics. But then I had so many people say, why don't you just open up some PT studios, The hurdle, the scary thing for me was going and signing a lease and not knowing that I was going to have somebody sign up for a membership. Rather, I had this, and I didn't nearly have the knowledge and breadth of information that you have, or how deep you have it. So it was scary for me, right? Because I didn't want to go in and make this potential risk with having a lease and then having customers maybe not join. So now I had to market to them and hope they come in. So how did you know this was going to work? Because you were a licensed model first, and then you got into franchising. So how did you have enough, enough information to go, yeah, this is going to work?
Well, I mean, a bunch of factors, really. I mean, we owned brick and mortars. So like we had clubs in this model operating in market that worked really well. We also, through licensing, we didn't just license to regular health club models. And when I say that, and you know what I mean, it's a large club that has a membership base that you're mining that membership to sell them personal training, right? We also work with plenty of independent studio operators. And if you asked me before we went to franchising, what model would you launch right now? I'm like, this is the one I would do. One coach, six clients, 1,500 square feet, relatively small. You only need 130 to 150, clients to make this thing, to make a really good margin on this thing, right? And there was so much empirical evidence from people that we were powering through licensing that were running a similar model per our suggestion that, I mean, look, and it's just a simple model. And so we owned them. We coached other people that had them. We suggested them to people that went and opened them successfully. I mean, we've suggested it to people who went and opened one and now they're on their sixth, seventh, wow, corporately owned or corporately, but like privately branded, right? So you can scale these things because the labor model is super simple. You've got 3 employees, right? I mean, it's dead simple. So we knew just through empirical evidence, and those are things we couldn't claim in the franchise because franchising is, again, if it's not in your item 19, can't talk about it. Got it, right? But we knew empirically, and we owned facilities that were doing it. And I mean, look, even before we went to full on franchising, we opened the exact same concept. We took a coach from our mothership gym that had zero business acumen. It's like, all right, let's take somebody who knows a little bit about training, is good with people, zero business acumen, see if we can power it with like marketing and all the back office things that we would provide in a franchise and see if it'll be successful. And the answer was yes, right? And so, yeah, I mean, we just trial and error, empirical evidence. We knew it would work. And it turns out, so far so good.
What's it take to, before you're breaking even? Well, let me say this. What does it take before you're cash flowing? Breaking even is probably a little longer.
Yeah, well, no, not really. I mean, so we force our franchisees to open with 75 clients. You think about that's half full, essentially, if you could max out at, say, 150, right? In most markets, that puts you at break even-ish, close, or even making a little bit of money. So that's a good story to tell, right? If we can open every club at break even or making a little bit of money, that's a good sign. And usually that 75 mark puts us in that area. Again, franchising is weird. I can't be like, everybody opens making money, because that's not true. You might be at break even, but that forced 75, it creates some urgency during the pre-sale. You're not allowed to open until you hit that number, right? And we're coaching, we've got a whole pre-sale team that's on the phone with your directors, 1 day a week, coach. And so it sort of forces people to open really close to break even, if not making a little money, which is great.
How long does that, because you're doing pre-sale. So how long does that take?
We are 3 months.
Awesome. 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very specific playbook. Yeah, it is. It's like there's a digital play, there's a community outreach play, there's all these moving parts. Imagine how easy it would be if you just logged onto a platform, which would be ours, and you click one click to receive your starter kit for your pre-sale, just for your community-based marketing. So it's a table, it's a tent skirt, or a table skirt, it's flyers, it's all the things that you need, right? And you're just editing like location, phone number, things like that. Right. So, that's the real beauty of a franchise. It's like, here's a turnkey play to pre-sale. Now you still have to get out there and do it. Doesn't mean it's easy. You still have to get out and talk to people, and you have to hustle, and it's a 4-letter word, right? You got to get out and do that. But at the same time, it's really nice to have the bandwidth. It's like, here's the playbook, just go run the play, right? It's a different animal than trying to figure it out on your own.
So what challenges do you think you had that you didn't anticipate when you were scaling this up? I mean, you've been in the industry for a while, you've maintained the same kind of flow. I don't know if it was intentional that you had the vision to franchise. So I want to talk about that a little bit, or if it just kind of evolved into this thing. But what were the challenges as you kind of went from having a few of your own locations, you're operating, then you're kind of licensing, and in my mind, I'm seeing the evolution. It may not even be that. And then you went into franchising. So how did that work, and what were the challenges before you kind of got to this point? Because you're at over 150 locations now.
Yeah, we're actually at like 215 now. I mean, we're awarding 20 locations a month. So you imagine 240 a year. Yeah, we're trying to keep the sucker on the rails and scale our team, keep the culture together, and all the things that come along with like behind that comes, to your point, a lot of work and to get these clubs open and successful. And so, yeah, it's a blast. And thankfully, we've got a ramp built and tripwires for hiring and all the things, scaffolding, if you will, built out to grow the business. But I would say, each step of the process had its challenge. I mean, when I first opened, I was a junior in college, and I think my biggest concern was like, am I going to be able to squeeze lunch in between the classes and training people from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m.? It's like, it was silly stuff like that. But at the time, it was a real concern, right? And then we scaled, and then I got married, had kids, and got a mortgage, and it was like a real business, and then it was like, well, how do we hire the right people? Yeah, right. Because I think at first it was like 1099 contractors, was a terrible idea, all the mistakes. And so, when we got to like, okay, like, can we really run a business? Do I have to be in this thing all day, every day? Like, okay, what kind of systems need to be put in place? Everything from the training to the induction of a client to the sales to the the customer service retention side. I mean, everything, right? And it came slow. I mean, it's been 32 years. And then, we ended up, when we pivoted from one-on-one to this personal training in this small group format, our revenues went through the roof. So we were like one of the highest revenue per square foot facilities in the country. And so at that point, it put me on the speaking circuit. And then, of course, you stand in front of people, even if you're a complete idiot. If somebody deems you an expert and puts you up there and you can string a few words together, it's like people are going to start asking for whatever that thing is, right? Can you help us with our sales system?
Well. Yeah. I think you've done pretty well, Rick.
Well, I mean, it's like, I don't know. It's look, man, at the end of the day, you're just one foot in front of the other, right? But I would say that at that point, we were doing a lot of consulting, and then people kept asking the same questions. Can you help us with our sales system? Can we do this? Can we do that? And it was right about the time when like LMSs were just coming out. So we're like, let's build a learning management platform, and then we could we'll fractionalize it. We'll deploy different parts of it depending on the type of business that we work with. And that became licensing. And then people would pay an upfront fee for training, and then they would pay an ongoing fee for updated content and coaching. And I mean, man, we had everything from CrossFit to giant 20,000 square foot tennis centers to Anytime Fitness to Gold's Gym. I mean, literally every kind of fitness business you can imagine, everywhere from India, Dubai, Tasmania, like everything in between. So we had a really interesting lens on the industry worldwide, where the gaps were, what customer avatar was maybe underserved, what's the right machine to service them. And so we had we had 2,500 door fronts at one point. So that was a really good business, right? And a couple of people approached us about an acquisition. And while the price was right, it wasn't necessarily the best structure. And it became readily apparent that the enterprise value of a licensing company is nowhere near the enterprise value of a franchise company. Mm-hmm. And we had a huge peek under the covers of how franchising works. I'd sat on these boards. We had deployed and operationalized things in a franchise structure. So it was like, all right. And then also boutique fitness was now approaching us towards the end of our licensing period. And they were people just like us that were like, can you power our entire franchise? Right. And I'm like, well, hold on. Like, if we're going to do that, we want the upside of owning the franchise. Yeah. Now, the difference is the cost of going to franchising. And this is something, if anybody's listening is considering it, because I get this question a lot. Licensing, it cash flows really well. You don't have any real controls per se, right? And it's one of the things that differentiates you from a franchise. But the enterprise value isn't as good. But it does cash flow really well. It's a great business, right? On the other end of the spectrum, you've got franchising, which there's a lot of controls in place, and the enterprise value is much higher. And I personally like the vehicle better because we can put these guardrails in place and just say, just run this play, and we can actually control that, which is actually good for people, in a lot of ways. As much as like your entrepreneurs listening, I could never do that. It's like, well, it's not for you. It's an entrepreneur, right? A little bit of risk tolerance, wants a tried and true playbook. Plus, we're selling to investors that aren't fitness people. So it needs to be dead simple so that they can hire teams and go run it. And so pivoting to franchising, I like the vehicle for success. I love entrepreneurship. I teach it at a local college. So you combine that with like fitness, which is a lifelong pursuit. It's like, man, I've got my two favorite things in one package now. Passionate about it as ever, as you can tell. Like, I'm still as stoked now as I was 32 years ago. It's just different. And again, the enterprise value of having 300 to 400 franchises is exponentially higher than, even 2,500 door fronts as a license. And so a lot of things went into that. But, each time you abandon something, the opportunity cost to move to the new thing, it's not taken lightly, because, like, again, pivoting from a business that has 2,500 door fronts at a pretty high monthly threshold That's a really good business, right? To leave that, to go to franchising, it was a big decision. It was, and we sat on it forever before we finally decided to do it.
Did you transition? Did you transition in that period? Like it was like, all right, well, we're going to keep these licensees going, or did you say, okay, we're exiting from this, and here in our agreement, this is how the exit works, and you guys are now taking it on? What was that? What'd that look like? Because I would imagine when you say leaving it, it brings to the idea that literally you just kind of like, chucked it out the window.
What is that? We didn't do that,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we still service some of that legacy revenue from licensing, and we really needed it. I mean, to be honest, like if you're going to get into a franchise, I mean, most franchises that are new, they have some kind of VC money or friends and family around that's pretty hefty, because it's going to cost you millions and millions of dollars to get from the inception of the idea, building the thing out. It's really expensive to sell it, right? Like if you want to grow at a decent pace, which franchising lends itself to doing that, you're going to have to, like we work with what's called an FSO, which is a franchise sales organization. They're expensive, but they're good. We get a lot of our leads from the franchise consultant networks, also real expensive. So, our franchise fee is $60K. We collect very little on that, right? So you have to just have staying power financially to get from, zero revenue to build the thing out, to get it ramped, get the clubs open, get them to be financially viable, because we're making a royalty on their top line revenue. And that takes a while, and then when you finally get to what they call royalty sufficient, which is your royalties are basically covering your expenses, then you're cooking with oil, right? Because you're just doubling down, and then you sort of reach this flywheel, point in time where things just keep rolling. And so we're close to that. We've got a little ways to go, but we needed the licensing business to cover that gap. Otherwise, we're like everyone else, and you're coming in, you're diluting yourself right off the bat, because you need the cash to cover that big gap.
What, switching gears here, I want to talk about some trainers, because I know that there's a lot of trainers out there. You talked about starting this as a junior in college, and I remember my college days when I wanted to open a gym. I submitted 3 different, you don't know. I mean, at that age, at least for me, I didn't know. You knew clearly more than I did. And I'm trying to figure this thing out. I want to open a gym, and I go to the banks, and I'm trying to raise money, and I'm submitting, these proposals. Go nowhere, obviously, because I'm a kid in college. But I also remember like thinking to myself, there's really no career in my degree, because I got a degree in exercise phys, and the career options were going to work at a hospital. I could go do that. And it just wasn't in me I'm not that type of person, to stay at a 40-hour work week kind of position. Hence, why we're even having this conversation right now, because I went down the entrepreneurial path. And the reality was I had fears, no different than opening a brick and mortar location. And I think it happens for a lot of coaches and trainers that either get their cert or get their degree, and they don't know where to start. So getting into this and making that leap of faith, what you're saying is there's a $60,000 franchise fee to get started, but I'm assuming that kind of pays itself back pretty quickly based on that 3-month window. And then on top of that, you also have trainers who are going, I just got a degree in this field. I know everything. I have all these certifications. Why am I going to run your program? Do you ever run into that?
Not really. I mean, again, most of our franchisees are more at the investor level. We have a few owner operators who, they typically were working in corporate. Fitness was a personal passion, and they left corporate and went and started an Alloy. And what they really wanted, again, was the bandwidth and the shortcut. I mean, even if you have the technical knowledge, like we do control the customer experience, and part of that is the programming. Look, the programming comes, I speak on the Perform Better circuit. It's the tip of the spear, strength conditioning folks in the world. That's where the programming comes from. I think most coaches, when they look at it, they're like, oh, this is cool. Like if they know what they're doing, they'll say, if I was going to build this, if I was going to build something, it would look like this. It's like, great, right? It's funny. We talk about coaches. It's like the brand new coach is great because they don't know anything. And they're just like, oh, this is awesome, right? And then you've got the really advanced coach who can recognize it for what it is, which is like, then a lot went into making it look so simple. So the coaches in between can be a little bit, struggle at times where you just have enough knowledge to be dangerous and you can't really you're trying to throw everything into your stew and churn it up. And it's like, wait, don't put paprika in there. It's going to ruin it, but you don't know that yet until you put it in there. And so
right.
I think the analogy there is always what Bruce Lee said, where he's like, hey, when I first started doing, martial arts, a punch was a punch and a kick was a kick. And then somewhere in between, it was like there was angles and different techniques and different kinds of kicks and different styles. And, it was really confusing. And then once I became like a 5th degree black belt, once again, punch is a punch, kick is a kick. So it's, on either end of that, it works pretty well. But I will just say we're not really selling per se or awarding that particular avatar, because they normally, right out of college, you don't have any funding. I mean, the $60K is the franchise fee, but you're going to spend, our FTD says anywhere from like high 100s up to like $450K to get one open,
which is low.
Right?
By the way,
it's still, really, you open historically, let's say you went to a well-known, like an Orange Theory, you're at $800,000, maybe more,
easy
to get one open, right? So it's still a very relevant like return on investment as far as the investment threshold. But there's not a lot of people coming out of college that have 300 or 400K and can't secure that either. And so normally our franchisees, our average franchisee buys 3 locations, which is a whole nother ballgame, right? And then they've got to fund the opening of them, not just the franchise fee. So it's a different animal. Now they do go and hire the individuals that we're talking about. So you still have to overcome the, like, well, I already know everything. Why would I run somebody else's programs? It's like, well, even for the sake of bandwidth, like, we run shifts. So it's like, if you're on the shift from 6 to noon, as an example, in the morning, you're going to train 6 people back to back to back to back to back. You're going to custom program for all those people. No shot, right? You bandwidth wise. So we have a system that gets them from the door, and there's algorithms that connect them based on the movement screens and all these things that get them to the right level of the program to be applied to them. So you could be a guy like you could be in a group with a 70-year-old lady with a bad shoulder. It's like, it works fine, right? But we control all of that. And if you're a coach and you're saying, well, I'm going to stay home on Sunday evening and individually program for 6 people per hour for my 35 hours of training this week, it's just not going to happen, right? So the mature folks will be like, all right, this is bandwidth for me to stand on, and I still have to coach because, as you know, you have a group of, a session of 6 people, and you come in and you're really fit, and we have, what's your level of fitness? What are your do's and don'ts or goals and injuries? And then you come in and say, man, I tweaked my back. I was planting a tree in my yard this weekend. We're just like, okay, all bets are off, right? So you still have to coach, still have to be in it, for that, particular customer, but it gives you a nice platform to stand on to scale. But those aren't necessarily ultimately who's buying our franchise, if that makes sense. So we're not selling to trainers necessarily. And we did that on purpose because, like, look, that's hard to scale. You're going to go one location at a time, right? Typically lower business acumen. It's just going to make it harder to scale a business with that customer avatar.
So what is the, thinking about your future plans? One of the biggest things that every gym and it's less in the PT world, because I think personal training clients, they have more of that relationship with their coaches. They're more bought in. But in the gym world, you have a lot of people that churn, right? We know that happens. And it also happens on the PT side. And when you do have churn, it's a big dollar amount, right? Like you said, $300 to $400 a month. So that's gone. So how are you guys managing that? How do you prevent that from happening? What things do you guys have in place to help prevent lost customers or churn in your business?
Well, a lot of it is just the business model, right? We talked about that earlier. If you're only servicing 130 to 150 people, you know everyone's name, you know everything about them, you know their fitness goals, you know if they're off that day, and there is margin, even hour over hour, there's margin built into that time for you to be able to have those private conversations with clients. It's not just, again, we're not running classes, right? It's not like we're not running it on the clock. We're not saying switch and everybody moves. We're not wearing headsets. I mean, this is personal training. We're just scaling it up to 6 people max. And so I think the business model alone is the main contributor to the low churn. And that's based on the interpersonal relationships that you can maintain, and everybody gets all the attention that they need. We have a great app. And so everybody's getting homework. They're getting step goals. It pulls in wearables. So it's like, you remember when you were training, like, it's just as important to get people to do things outside of the gym as it is inside the gym. And so I think the business model allows for that. We always talk about being the hub in the wheel, and the spokes in the wheel are nutrition, recovery, sleep. I mean, everything, right? Like supplementation. Like we partner with Merrick Health, which is like concierge blood work with like prescriptions on the back end. So we can take an inside out approach. So
I saw
there's
that.
all these
That's
cool
awesome.
things that we put around the hub, right? And that's great for our customer avatars, 45 to 65, by the way. That's our sort of sweet spot. So I think that lends itself mostly, but then on top of that, yes, there's a ton of stuff that's, you can systemize soft touch things. Here's an example. I've talked about this a lot, but one thing that we do that we stole from the Ritz-Carlton is a promotion each month. We call it surprisingly personable. And we basically set aside a budget of a couple $100 a month, and we just randomly gift clients, just random things, right?
Cool.
And it does a couple things. It gets your staff thinking and talking about how to love on clients, because you're in meetings saying, all right, we've got this budget of $200 a month. Who do we want to gift and what can we get them? And they'll be like, oh, you know what? I was having a conversation with Susie the other day and she hates vegetables. And I was telling her about this spices that I use that make them taste pretty decent. So I'm going to buy her some of those. It's like, all right, check. And then we just keep a budget and where that money's going. And so little things like that in a group of 130 to 150 go a really long way, right? I know you can't touch everybody every month, but that's not the goal. Actually, the randomization of it is what makes it special, right? It's not a strategic every single month. And so we've got things like that. We've got like frequent sweaters, or if you show up a certain amount of times per month. I mean, there's just so many things baked into our systems. But I promise you, Michael, I think if we had to just zoom out and be like, all right, what is it really? It's the fact there's only 130 to 150 people in there.
Right. Yeah. You can be highly personable and you can maintain that relationship. What's the length of time that a customer stays with you or stays with
at our corporate clubs, average is 36 months. We've got, depending on what sort of cohort of customers that we have in our gym. So think about it this way. We've got clubs opening. We've got 5 or 6 clubs opening every month. We've got clubs that are maturing out of these sort of cohorts. And by that, I mean like pre-sale. Great. Okay. 0 to 6 months. That's a cohort. 6 to 12, 12 to 24. Like, what does that look like? Right. And so what we find is it takes about 8 or 9 months to fully stabilize. And then after that, we haven't been franchising long enough to know exactly, but I can tell you from our corporate clubs, it's 36 months is our average stay. So we would anticipate something similar as we get down the road. But right now we just have, retention or attrition as a percentage, and it's really low. Like in our corporate clubs, we've always held it around 3% attrition, which is 97% retention, right? Mm-hmm. Again, we have to get through pre-sale, dust shakes out, everyone gets used to making the sausage, so to speak, right? Then about 9 months down the road, we see that our clubs stabilize really well. Now, still making money in that process, but here's my people that are going to stay forever. And once you land those folks, they just don't go anywhere. And so that's the beauty of the model is it's ramp quickly and then hold. And then you get to do fitness instead of just sales and marketing all the time.
Right. So what's the outlook for Alloy? What's the outlook for the brand and for you?
World domination. Nothing short of that.
I love it.
No. So our goal is 800 locations in the lower 48 by 2030. And our current pace will get there much earlier, but it's still a pretty aggressive pace. We have a runway of about 950, believe it or not. And that's, we've mapped out all the major MSAs, like cities, whatever, perfect areas for alloys, put it that way, in the lower 48. And there's actually runway for like 950. So 800 is doable. And that's putting them in like home run areas, home run locations. Mm-hmm. So check. And then that doesn't, obviously account for any kind of international. We've had some talks already with some international masters that would, be able to put alloy in their inventory and sell that into their markets as well. So yeah, man, it's a lot going on, but like right now it's just blocking and tackling. Find the right candidates.
Do you see the innovations that are happening with VR, XR, that style of training? Do you see that impacting you negatively or being a positive influence?
I think positive. I just think, in a world where everything is, like in our post-World War II mentality where everything is based on efficiencies, and you think about factories and like we can have robots make this instead of people, we save this much money. And I don't really think that's what people want right now. If you look at least in the near future, 5 to 7 years, everything's experiential, right? Like Airbnb as an example, their biggest revenue is all the little stuff you tack on. It's like, yes, I rent my Airbnb. And then, by the way, they're going to send me 7 other cool activities I could do in the area that I can book right through them. Like I can take a food tour, I can get massage, I can get a gondola ride, whatever those things are, right? That's where consumers are going. And that's what we're trying to be. So while there's some training techniques and some AI and some automation built around it, we have to be really careful not to do that at the expense of the human to human experience. If that makes sense. So we're certainly looking at all those tools for efficiency, at the same time understanding like it's not that model, right? It's not a commoditized $9 membership where you can sign up online and cancel online or whatever. It's not that. It's about you and I having a personal relationship with each other. And people crave that. You know, we're still monkey brain for the most part. We haven't evolved, right? We're not part machine yet. So we may get there and hopefully we'll be ahead of it when we do. But right now it's like people are still craving seeing another human being and having interpersonal relationships. And that's what we do.
How can people get involved? You know, if they want to learn more about Alloy or they want to, you know, talk to you or talk to somebody on your team to understand what it is you guys are doing to see if it might be the right fit. How can they do that?
Sure. Just go to alloyfranchise.com and there's a form there right on the page. I think any page you land on, a little form will pop up. Fill it out and let us know how we can help and we'll go from there. We've got a whole sales team that'll reach out. And if it's just a personal question, I mean, just hit me up on social media, just Rick Mayo, just like it sounds, anywhere and everywhere. And I'll help you however I can.
Awesome. Rick, thanks so much for being on today. I really appreciate the time. I think everyone's going to get a lot of value out of this and hopefully some of the ones that I'm thinking of, because I know that there's gym owners or training studio owners that are kind of struggling a little bit and they actually need this type of system. They need this, they need Alloy in their business. So hopefully they reach out and convert. So thank you.
Michael, thanks for having me on. It was great. Appreciate it.
Likewise.